On today's menu at the Glow Diner, I knew in my heart that I couldn't go another year without knowing what would actually happen to me if I tried and really gave it my all. If you want something that you've never had before, you're gonna have to do things that you've never done before. Take the things that are important to you very seriously and focus on that first and foremost. Hello ladies and welcome to the Glow Diner. Today I am serving you with combo number 1, the habit building house special. As always with combo episodes, the information I'm giving you today, so tips and advice, is all backed up by science. So if there's anything I talk about today that you're really curious to learn more about, all of the links to the research, studies, papers, articles are going to be in the show notes. I just want to quickly apologize for my voice. I have gotten a little bit of the sickies over here and I'm slowly getting over it, but I really didn't want to procrastinate the start of this podcast, so bear with me. But funny enough, this takes me exactly to what I wanted the first subject of this episode to be. I've always been somebody who starts planning for a lot of projects or things that I want to start working on, and I get stuck in that planning stage. I had the idea for the Glow Diner way over a year ago, and I started making the graphics for it, kind of getting ideas, and then I went on to do my master's thesis abroad, so it was kind of put on the back burner for about a year. And then I knew when I came back that it was something I actually really wanted to fully commit to, because I knew in my heart that I couldn't go another year without knowing what would actually happen to me if I tried and really gave it my all. And this episode is going to come out around mid-February, and the reason for that is because I feel like January is always such a loud month. There's a lot of motivation around and even pressure to absolutely be ready to start on January 1st, because if that's not what you do, then you're already too late and you're doing it wrong. And that's really the mindset that I want to avoid today in this episode when it comes to habit building and becoming your best self, because the truth is there's really no perfect day to start. The perfect day to start is the day that you finally start. You can't wait until you're ready, because ready is not a feeling, it's a decision, and you cannot wait until everybody around you is also feeling super motivated. And I think one of the big reasons a lot of us feel like we need to share our goals and our aspirations for the new year online is because we think that they'll help us stay accountable and they'll help us stay on track. But here's our first recipe for today that proves how wrong this is. There is a study titled "When Intentions Go Public" that shows that participants who shared their goals publicly worked for shorter periods, showed less persistence, and were less likely to follow through compared to those who kept their intentions private. So basically, they showed that sharing goals publicly can reduce motivation to achieve them. The reason for this is because whenever people acknowledge that you have a certain goal, it kind of gives you that fake mark of progress. So your brain feels as though it's already accomplished a part of the goal, and then you lose all the motivation to actually do it because you've already gotten that premature reward. So in goal theory research, this is actually called premature self-completion. So it's whenever your brain relaxes once the identity feels socially recognized. So it's that false feeling of progress that lowers the drive to actually keep working towards a goal. So to say that social recognition can sometimes replace real progress, your brain takes the praise instead of actually doing the work. Now, this definitely doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever share your goals with anyone. If you tell somebody that you respect or whose opinion really matters to you, the desire you'll have to avoid disappointing them can actually boost your commitment to your goal. And then something else that can be very helpful is having an accountability partner. But it's very important that you make it very explicit to that person that they are to keep you accountable. I was really happy when I found that study because it really solidified something that I had felt in the past before whenever I had a project I was working on. I've always been really into content creation, and I've tried YouTube, I've tried TikTok, and whenever I would have an idea for a project that I wanted to do, I would tease it online, or I would share with like a bunch of my friends about the ideas that I had. And most of the time, just being told that it was a really great idea and that it was going to work out almost made me feel like I didn't even want to do it anymore, which never really made sense to me, but reading this study, it finally does now. And with the Glow Diner, I did something that I had never done before. I didn't tell anybody except for 2 very close friends of mine. So I have multiple episodes recorded, I have all of my graphics, everything done, and one day I'm just gonna drop it and we'll see how it goes. Now the question is, how can we take those really big goals or ambitions that we have for ourselves and make them into smaller, easy daily habits? Because I keep hearing so much about SMART goals. If you've never heard this before, SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based goals. Basically, everything you need a goal to be for you to reach it, which again, I have fallen victim to a few times. For the last 3, 4, potentially 5 years, I've had the goal to get my front splits. As a SMART goal, it was specific. I wanted to get my front splits. It was measurable because obviously I'd be able to tell whether or not I am getting my front splits. It's achievable because I always gave myself a full year to reach it. It was relevant because I'm somebody who spends a lot of time in the gym and I wanted something that would also help me focus on mobility and flexibility. And it was time-based. Like I said, I had a deadline of 1 year to achieve it. So using the concept of SMART goal, this is everything I would have needed to achieve it and give me all the motivation. But the issue is that motivation is not enough to shape your behavior. What does shape your behavior is your environment. Our second recipe of the day is one of my all-time favorite studies by Dr. Leanne Robbins. The study followed a team of Vietnam War veterans that had developed a certain very addictive drug addiction while deployed. And what was really surprising is that a lot of the veterans stopped using that very addictive drug without any formal treatment or rehabilitation programs. Whenever they were in Vietnam, the war zone context included easy drug availability, peer and social cues from fellow soldiers that were already using the drugs, high stress, trauma, and boredom, as well as very few consequences for use during deployment. But once they were back in the United States, they returned to a very stable, structured daily life, families, and social networks that did not support the very highly addictive drug use, fewer environment cues associated with the drug use, and legal social deterrence to continued use. So what that study showed is that even though it was a very, very highly addictive drug, it was tied to specific environmental cues. So returning home removed the locations, the social context, the stressors, and the availabilities. So without those cues, their addiction failed. This is a very fascinating study because it shows that behavior, including addiction even, is not just about internal willpower or addictive personality. It's very heavily shaped by the environment, routine, social context, and cues that are surrounding that behavior. So if the environment shapes our behavior to that extent of being able to stop addiction, how do we design our own environment and habits on purpose? And I quickly mentioned cues just now, and this comes from the concept of the habit loop. There are 2 very popular books that mention the habit loop that you might have heard of before, called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. They label the habit loop a little bit differently, but it comes down to the same concept of having a cue, routine, and a reward. So the cue is essentially the trigger. It's what tells your brain to initiate a behavior. It can be anything from a time, a location, an emotional state, social context, or even a preceding action. So in fancy neurological terms, your cues are what activate learned association in the basal ganglia, and then it prepares the brain to run a familiar pattern automatically. So for example, feeling stressed after work will lead your brain to anticipate relief. The next component is the routine. So it's the actual behavior that you perform in response to the cue. So that can either be a physical action, a mental habit, or an emotional response. So again, in fancy terms, the repetition straightens the neural pathways, making the routine more authentic and a lot less effortful. So for example, coming back to that stress after work example, your routine might end up being to just scroll on social media. And then the last component being the reward or the reinforcement. So the reward is what your brain gets from the behavior. It tells your brain that this is working and you should do it again next time. So it can be a dopamine release, reduction of discomfort, social validation, or a sense of completion or control. So with the stress after work example, scrolling might give you temporary relief, brain releases dopamine, and the habit is now reinforced. Because dopamine doesn't just reward the action, it also teaches the brain to crave that routine whenever the cue appears again. So the loop becomes automatic whenever the brain begins to anticipate the reward as soon as the cue appears. So there's a craving that forms somewhere between the cue and the reward, and the routine runs with little conscious effort. So that's why it's really hard to stop a bad habit, because they're not really decisions anymore, they're just learned loops. works. But the good news is that once you actually learn about the habit loop and you're able to understand it and what are your cues and rewards, you can actually change a habit by using it. So our goal is either going to be to avoid a bad habit by making it harder or make a good habit easier. And we shall start with the former. And there are multiple ways to do this, and the most effective way is option 1, which would be to keep the cue and the reward, but change the routine. So keeping the same example again, just to keep it really simple, your cue would be stress and your reward would be relief. Your old routine was to scroll on social media. Let's change it to either going out for a walk, doing some breath work, and journal. So the brain still gets what it wants, just through a better behavior. Option number 2 is what I feel works best for me personally, and it would be to completely remove or alter the cue. So if I find myself scrolling at night when I don't want to be, either I just don't bring my phone to the bedroom, or I use those apps that block social media during certain times of the day, and I find that actually really works well for me. So it really all comes down to stopping a bad habit or a routine by making it harder to achieve, by changing it with something else, or by completely removing the cue that makes you go into that behavior. And then when it comes to good habits, it's all about making them easier. And again, there's multiple ways to do that. My absolute favorite one is habit stacking. So there are habits in my life that I've gotten really used to and I really do every single day. For example, I cannot go to sleep without brushing my teeth first. But for the longest time, I really struggled being consistent with flossing. So something I do now, in the cabinet in my bathroom, I have my toothpaste and I put my little floss thingy right on top of it. So whenever I go to brush my teeth, the floss is right there. I have to floss first. It's literally in the way. So whenever you have a habit that you know you want to implement in your life, something new, think of another habit that you're already always doing. Something else for me is I really wanted to make sure I was taking creatine every single day. And I had already gotten into the habit that whenever I would come home from the gym, I would have a protein shake. So now before I even go to the gym, most of the times I make sure that I have my creatine in my protein shake or my protein smoothie so that whenever I come back from the gym, it's just automatic. It's already done. It's in there and I'm taking it. Another way to make good habits so much easier is to make the cue so extremely obvious that you genuinely cannot escape it. An example that's very popular is keeping your running shoes next to your bed. So when you wake up in the morning, you see the running shoes, your next step is literally just to put them on and go for a run. And if you use this idea in a context of the habit loop, you could say, for example, that every time you finish your morning jogging, you reward yourself with a smoothie. So if you really get into the habit of running, rewarding yourself with a smoothie, it comes to a point where just seeing the running shoes will have you crave that smoothie and intentionally get into the behavior of going for your jog. So our goal is really to trick our brain into that automation. And I'm going to give you another example of something that I did for my bachelor's degree. So throughout my bachelor's, I was finishing 2 majors, I was writing a thesis, I had multiple jobs on campus, and I'm not saying this to brag, but just to say that my time management was so incredibly important to a point where I knew that if I had time to study, I needed to sit down and study right away. Like there was no time for me to set up and get in the headspace. I needed to just sit down, study until I had something else that I needed to do. And something that worked weirdly well for me was I had this one extremely specific music that I used to listen to, and it was on YouTube, and I can try to find it back again, but it was this super complex name. It was like oldies playing in another room, crickling vinyls, cats and dogs, rain, whatever random sounds. But that sound was so specific to my brain, and I used to listen to it whenever I would study because it would kind of drown out the noises in the library and I'd be able to focus better. But you guys, it had come to a point where as soon as I would press play on that music, my brain would just intentionally start craving the relief of whenever I was done studying, and I would get into studying right away. And it's so funny because while I was doing my master's, I needed to write my thesis and all of that. And even now today, I'm studying for the strength and conditioning exam for the certification. And I have been using that music again. And I swear, just hearing the few first little seconds of that very specific music will get me in that study headspace like nothing else. I will just be fully locked in, and that's the only time I ever listen to that music is if I want to study. And I think that has been somehow really helpful to me. I also remember this girl on TikTok, and I'll try to tag her if I can find her original video, but she was talking about how whenever she was writing her thesis, she used to wear this tiara, and just wearing a tiara would instantly put her in the mood of, okay, it's thesis writing time. Now, I have quite a few more recipes that I want to get into, and those really focus on why certain of your habits fail. So I have 5 reasons to get through for you, as well as a solution for each of them, of course. So the first one is over-reliance on motivation by Baumeister and colleagues. And this is the idea that motivation fluctuates a lot and really cannot sustain long-term behavior. So the best thing you can do for this is design systems that also work on low motivation day. So you want cues that are really good, either a fixed time, fixed place, and very minimal friction. The second recipe is by Widen, and it's about weak or inconsistent cues. So it's when the link between the cue and the routine never really stabilizes, and that happens if you have cues that, like I just said, are too weak. And that solution is actually what I've talked about a little bit earlier with the habit stacking. It's probably the best way. Take a habit that is very strong and in your routine for you and add on another habit to it to make sure that you're able to keep repeating that routine. The third reason why habits might fail is having a reward that is delayed or unclear. This happens a lot with people getting into fitness for physical appearance reasons. The truth is, your body is not going to completely change after only a day of training. But then the problem with this is your brain is unable to associate your behavior with the benefit because you're not seeing the benefit right away. So what you can do is add an immediate reward. So for example, tracking, satisfaction cues, small wins, while your long-term reward actually develops. And there's this trend that I've seen going around TikTok. I think they're called like hole punched cards that people are making. And basically they're having this idea of they'll have a little card, and let's say it says they want to work out 10 times. And every single time they work out, they punch a hole in the card. And then whenever they get to the 10, they get like a free sports bra, a free scrunchie or something like that. So that could be a really good idea to keep on track with a habit. So you get that satisfaction of tracking your habit and then getting a reward also after 10 times before you actually see visually the results of you working out a lot. I know for me personally, I use an app on my phone, which is a habit tracker. If I'm being completely honest, it was working really, really well for me within the first few months of using it, but as I kind of started falling off some of the habits, I don't really use it as much anymore, and every time I try to use it again, for some reason it just doesn't pick up. So that's something that worked a little bit for me but then didn't anymore. So if something works for you and then doesn't anymore, I guess just trying to find something new. I kind of want to try the hole punch cards. I feel like having something physical instead of on my phone, because I am spending so much less time on my phone now than I used to. So maybe having something physical might help me keep track of my progress a little better. The next reason is willpower depletion. So the whole idea that the more decisions you take during the day, the more cognitive fatigue you experience, and that reduces self-control a lot. So the best way to counter this is to automate your decision. So have habits come around at the exact same time within the same rules, or even give yourself fewer choices to make throughout the day. So something that's really popular is picking out your outfit the night before, or having all of your dinners planned out for the week so that whenever you get to a point where you have to get dressed or you have to decide what you have for dinner, you have less choices to make and your willpower doesn't deplete as much. The last reason is something that happens to all of us and is quite unfortunately inevitable, and it is life transitions disrupting your cues. So we come back to the Vietnam War study where old context disappears and breaks your habit loops. This can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing if you're getting into really good habits and then all of a sudden your environment changes and you are unable to get back into the right routine. So there's a 2008 study about habit discontinuity, and the solution that they give is to reinstall habits immediately in new contexts before you have any chance of a new routine solidifying. So I started a new job in a few weeks, and I've really gotten into the habit of working on the podcast whenever the boyfriend is at work, because it's just quiet at home and easier to record. So I know that's going to be a challenge for me to make sure that I can get into a routine of when to actually record the podcast instead of doing it when the boyfriend isn't home, because we're always going to be home at the same time now. Okay, so I'm very sorry. I lied about how many reasons I said I was going to give because there's an extra one that I just realized I forgot about and I really want to add in here because it's super important. But something else that might lead to your habits failing is a lack of repetition, because that's truly how the habit loop works and how forming habits works, is repeating it over and over and over again until it just becomes automatic to the brain. And sometimes building a good habit over time is more important than building the perfect habit right away. Let's say a habit you want to get into is going to the gym and weight training for an hour every single day. Now, as a gym girly, I know for a fact that there are about 50 different reasons not to go to the gym. It's too early in the morning, I'm tired. I haven't washed my workout clothes, I have nothing to wear. The weather outside is fries. I don't have enough time until I have to go to work. If I go now, it means I won't have time to eat. And if I don't have time to eat, I'm going to be really tired all day at work. I promise you, there is an infinite number of excuses. And in a lot of the books about habit forming, something they will tell you is that when you miss a habit twice, this is a new routine forming. So don't let yourself miss 2 days. But how do you make sure to never miss 2 days in a row when there are so many good excuses to miss? And that's by making your habit so easy, so simple, so reachable that you have literally no excuse for it. So if your goal is to go to the gym an hour almost every single day and, get your fitness on, the way you can start with it is just by doing a 10-minute workout on YouTube from your living room. And I want you to get into the habit of doing it every single day to a point where that 10-minute workout is now automatic. And then you work your way up to a 30-minute workout. And then from there, work your way up to actually making it to the gym and walking on the treadmill for 30 minutes or for 20 minutes or for however, until you actually build to a point where the 1 hour workout has become completely realistic in your schedule and you've repeated the habit so many times that, again, it just becomes something automatic and the excuses don't even cross your mind anymore. Because for me, there was a solid few months in my life where I would just wake up at 5 in the morning and I was in the gym before I even knew it. I need to get back into it. I'm not gonna lie, I fell off a little bit, but we're gonna get back into it and I'm gonna work my way up to it. But seriously, repetition. And all there is to say about it is that discipline fails whenever habits are designed poorly. So not when you lack willpower or not when you lack motivation. You really want to make sure that your amount of decisions taken are minimized, your cues are stables, and make repetition so easy that you have no other choice but to stay consistent. Now, I'm going to serve you a little bit of a mindset shift with a side of fries, okay? Because the truth is, if you want something that you've never had before, if you want your body to look a way that it's never looked before, if you want a certain amount of money in your account that you've never had before, if you want a routine that you've never had before, you're going to have to do things that you've never done before. I'm seeing a lot of things online about the Lunar New Year, saying that however you act on the first day of the Lunar New Year, which I believe is February 17, however you act that day is going to set the pace for how you're going to act for the rest of the year. And it's really got me thinking, if I knew that there was a specific day, let's say tomorrow, however we act tomorrow is going to be exactly how we're going to be acting for the rest of the year, let's say. I want you to think about how you would actually be acting on that day. What habits you would actually pick up on, what things you would be getting done, what kind of mindset you would be for the whole day, because that's really going to tell you what are the things that you should be prioritizing to get to where you actually want to be in the future. And it's by showing up with that exact mindset every single day that you are actually able to make every day count and get to a bigger outcome in the end. And I know this always feels really overwhelming because we live in a time where we have access to what everybody else is doing, and it always feels like there's another habit you should be picking up or another trend that you should be taking part of, and it always adds up to a lot. So take the time to really figure out what is important to you and don't treat it casually. Take the things that are important to you very seriously and focus on that first and foremost. Because I know for me, I cannot spend another year wondering where I would be by the end of it if I spent all of it actually giving everything that is important to me my all. And it's not even about becoming the most successful person out there and having it all, but it's really about finding out what my full potential is and how far I can go if I decide to give myself all the best chances to succeed. And the best way I've found to kind of give myself a little bit of that tough love, because hustle culture does get very toxic, and I don't think that we should all be burning ourselves out. I don't think every single day needs to be 100% discipline and productivity, and if you're doing something and it's not making you money, making you smarter, or making you hotter, it's a waste of time, because at the end of the day, we're all human and there are so many other things in this world to enjoy than just trying to accomplish it all. So the best way I find when it comes to discipline and keeping myself accountable is to kind of treat myself the same way I would treat a daughter. So, you tell your daughter to stay in bed when she's sick or to have a candy once in a while, but at the end of the day, you'd make sure that she gets in her vegetables and that she gets in her physical activity. So it really all comes down to balance, and that has been a mindset that has always kind of helped me in figuring out exactly where I need to put my energy and when something is worth doing versus when I need some rest. So I really hope that today's special hit the spot. I know this is a bit of a shorter episode when it comes to the podcasting world, but I'm still trying to figure out exactly my style, my voice, and how much information I can put in an episode without feeling like I'm just throwing a lot of studies and knowledge at you. And I spent so much time planning this podcast and wanting it to be perfect until I realized that it didn't have to be perfect to start, but I had to start to make it perfect. So I'm learning as I go. I'm enjoying my time here, and I hope you are too. Which, if you are, please follow, subscribe, review, and rate the podcast depending on which platform you're listening from. It's going to help other like-minded girlies find the pod, and it's going to help me figure out what you actually enjoy from me. I'm so happy that you found us and that you are here today at the Glow Diner. As always, this one's on me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!